Welcome to this lecture review. Here we're looking at the Guide to Computer Forensics and Investigation. This will be the 5th edition. This video specifically is for Chapter 11, which is Email and Social Media Investigations. So our objective is to explain the role of email in investigations, describe client and server roles in email, describe the tasks investigating email crimes and violations, explain the use of email server logs, explain how to approach the investigation as it relates to social media communication. That's where it's going to get kind of interesting because I do vary from our author thought process here. And we're going to look at some available email forensics tools. Now, do keep in mind that this is more computer forensics, and so we'll cover some of the basic email tools, but not super in-depth. So, as we start exploring the role of email in the investigation, we have to realize there are a few things. More emails are coming in as scams and fraud attempts. This is happening in two major areas. Things like phishing and farming, or sometimes also called spoofing. Phishing is the most common one though, and this is an email that may contain a link or text or PDF to a website. Basically, it could be a malware, it could be malicious code, it could be lots of things. The goal here is it's trying to gain access to your system and or gain access to personal information. So it can vary depending on the type of phishing email. Most common phishing that most people get are like the fake car warranty letters in the physical mail. I get them constantly. Your car is running out of warranty. Renew now for the premier package for $100. Send it to such and such. Clearly, they're fake letters. That's a phishing letter. So there's also it's called farming, which is some type of DNS poisoning that may take users to a erroneous website. A very common one is like the Nigerian Prince, Nigerian Bank. New York Lottery is always a good one. I get those emails constantly. I have won the New York Lottery like every month for years. But in reality, that's not real. What I really like with the farming, when you're able to actually tie it in with DNS poisoning and DNS spoofing, I've actually had a link, like an email from my bank saying my account was compromised to log in and change my password. And they'll give me the link, so it'll take me right to the site. This particular time I was banking with Wells Fargo, and the DNS poisoning actually took me to Wells Fargo. And it looked like Wells Fargo's website. But I happened to notice the site URL was slightly different. Instead of it saying Wells Fargo, WELLS, it said Well Fargo, WELL. So, I mean, that was the only way that I noticed that it was different. Again, we can also have what's called spoofing, and a spoofing email can be used to commit fraud. Basically, with this, we're looking at something that seemed to be legit. In reality, it was not. So how do we figure out if these emails are legit? We can always check the message headers for legitimate contact or to verify its legitimacy. Emails can be sent and received in two common ways: internet, intranet. There are two major ones. Within the client-server architecture, we can have internal email and we can have external email. It kind of just depends. Typically, with this type of architecture, you also have AAA, authentication, authorization, and accountability, thus protecting the accounts. Things like verification that you are who you say you are, authentication, could also be with a password. And then authorization would be once we verified you, Do you have access to these resources? So as we start exploring our roles for our email client, typically there is a structure to this. The email client is actually going to be receiving the email from an email server. Typically a email server is what's called a email delivery agent or email transit agent. The naming convention typically is an alias at a domain dot an extension. So the alias could be anything except for the @ sign. The @ sign is what separates the alias and the domain. And you'll notice, like if you go to johnsmith@somecompany.com, alias at some company, that's the domain, .com, that's going to be the dot extension. You can trace corporate emails a lot easier because most of the time these domain names are registered to organizations that legally have to keep records. So similar to other types of investigations, the goal here is to find out who's behind a crime, to collect the appropriate evidence that you're legally allowed to, present your findings so that you can help build a case. Know the applicable privacy laws for the area that you're doing the investigation in. Do not assume that all laws apply. Do not assume that no laws apply. Typically, this is where you want to start looking at general counsel and have them help guide you. Email crimes depend on several factors. Your location, city, state, region, country, all of this is important because spam may not be a crime in some states. Spam may not be a crime in some countries. In other countries, it is. Examples of crimes involving email could be trafficking, extortion, harassment, stalking, fraud, child pornography, terrorism, and so much more than that. Keep in mind that email is a way for communication to take place, and that communication then could support a number of crimes. Examining the actual message, if you have access to the victim's computer or mobile device, you can actually use the victim's email client so that you can find copies of the emails, maybe access protected or encrypted materials, print emails. That's assuming that you have access. Also, you could recover deleted emails if you had access to the email client. You can do it from a email server. It's a lot harder for that. So a common thing is before you begin your actual examination, just like with a computer, you want to be able to have backup copies. You don't want to work off originals. So copies and printed copies of emails, that way you have things to work off of. Part of this would involve, if you print off the emails, you could be printing the ones that are tied to the violation, whether it be a criminal violation or a policy violation. That way you have it. Many email programs have a GUI for you to interact with it. If you're in the Microsoft realm, there's like the Microsoft Exchange interface that allows you access. There's also forensics tools and forensics options built into Exchange for you to work with. Investigators should learn how to find email headers, both in a GUI and web-based clients, just because these are the two popular ones. After you open up an email header, you can copy and paste them into a text document. That way you can use the text document to do a lot of your editing, or sifting, or filtering. For Outlook, you double click the message and then click File and Properties. From there, you should be able to find the appropriate header. Here's an example of a Outlook 2016, an email I sent from myself to myself, File, properties, and here's the details. Here's the internet header, the email server, its IP address, well, at least its internal IP address, all the detailed information that I could be filtering this email off of. Here is, again, a photo of it. AOL, Yahoo, they all, Gmail, Hotmail, MSNBC, they all have them. Headers contain very useful information. The mail piece of information you're looking for is the originating email's IP address, date and timestamps, if there are file names using attachments, are there unique message numbers? Sometimes there are. At least if you're able to get it into Notepad, you can actually break it down by sections. If you're looking at the additional email files, like the attachments, again, you can actually look at them through copying of the messages and things like that. If we're dealing with a mail client, for example, Outlook, understanding how they save email files is important. Outlook uses typically a PST and or an OST file for storing all emails. Outlook will access those two files to actually pull the emails into Outlook. They also have files for your calendar and things of that nature. In a web-based email, you're not actually having a local copy, you're actually looking at the OST file that resides on the server. So tracing an email message, you can actually use a registry site to find points of contacts, like Google, if you want to see who owns a specific domain. Using network email logs, you can look at router logs, switch logs, firewalls. If you have a security appliance like a SIM or an IPS, all of them are using the appropriate, well, assuming you're collecting the logs and the logs are turned on, you can use these to filter traffic on your network. So you can actually pull detailed information logs that you may need. Here's an example of some logs. So an email server is loaded with software that uses protocols specific for email. Typically, an email server has three major components: a front end, a back end, and logs. The front end is typically a web portal. Back end is typically a database, and then log files. Email logs generally identify things like the email, the message, the sending IP address, receiving and reading dates and times, content, and other system specific information. So if you contact the suspect's network email administrator, you should be able to pull data from their email server. It may or may not always work. If we're dealing with UNIX email servers, you actually have like the sendmail, the syslog. That's where specific files are being saved. The var log mail log that records the SMTP, POP, and IMAP communications. They contain the IP address and timestamps that we would be comparing with emails of the victim. Again, default location for storing log files is the var log area, and then you would parse it out with the find and locate. The Microsoft version is called Microsoft Exchange, uses a database, uses a extensible storage engine, and it's very helpful when you're looking at investigating in with Exchange. There's actually a ton of built-in tools now that kind of help with the forensics analysis of users that are in Exchange. Nice thing with Exchange, you have transaction logs and you checkpoint logs. You have logs for just about anything You also have temporary files that could be lost if the server is too busy. That's if you're doing a forensics investigation, that may or may not be important. Kind of depends on what's the purpose of the investigation. To retrieve logs, you can actually use PowerShell commandlets to do that, or you can log into the Exchange Management Console, the ECP, to be able to pull data. Office 365 does have the same capability of the Exchange server in regards to log and forensics tools. Here we're looking at the specific logs on an Exchange server. So what tools are out there to kind of help do this? We've mainly focused on access data's FTK, but they do have an FTK for Outlook. They also have things like Sawmill and other things. Though most of the time I've used access data or Incase for my email forensics. Honestly, with that, you'd want to see what tools are being used in the time that you're doing this. Because tools get updated. Some tools get dated. So it just kind of depends on what's popular when you're doing this. So some tools you want to be aware of are going to be the tools that help you find the email database, personal email files, offline storage, and log files. The advantages of using these types of data recovery tools is you don't need to know how email servers and clients work to extract the data, though again, this is more specialized. That's why I really like Exchange, because a lot of these tools are built directly in. So after you compare email logs with messages, you should be able to verify things like email account, message ID, addressing, date, time, to see if there is enough information to warrant further investigation. With some tools, you can scan email database files on a suspect's Windows computer to locate any emails they've deleted and or restored. You can do the same thing on a email server depending on their retention settings. Talking business email, typically you'd be assuming retention should be there or retention policies should be there, but again, there is no guarantee. OSForensics has the ability to index data on a disk image or an entire drive for faster retrieval. You can filter this and you can find things specific to email clients, which we're going to do this activity on page 439. Again, here is our OSForensics recovery. We're going to be doing these lab videos in a later video section because I actually want to go through each chapters in all the labs. You can use a hex editor to carve email messages as well. Things like the inbox format, and that's dealing with how emails are stored in a very flat, plain text file. You have the MIME, which is more common, which is the multi-purpose internet mail extensions, MIME, and this is vendor unique. Again, Microsoft PSTs and OSTs. Most of my experience has been more in the Microsoft realm, so I'm dealing with PSTs and OSTs, so I do have a little bit of bias there. Again, here's our hex editor for our carving of email. Our hex editor for carving out email messages. So let's talk about recovering Outlook files. Sometimes PSTs get damaged. You may actually have to reconstruct a PST, and there are many advantages to using a lot of the forensics tools. Deleted PST files can be partial or completely recovered. Just depends on the recovery tool. Scan PST exe is a very common recovery tool, which you can use in conjunction with Microsoft Office to repair both OSTs and PSTs. You can find better tools out there, newer tools out there. You just have to keep in mind when you're doing this, look at what the industry has recognized as the appropriate OST and PST reconstruction tools, because this varies depending on the version of Outlook and the version of Exchange you have. Guidance software uses the SysTool plugin, again, through version 2013. SysTool extracts BSD files from an in-case forensics file format. Data Newman, again, it just kind of depends on the year and the version, so do keep that in mind. The Enron case is a great example for the importance of email investigation. Enron had more than 10,000 emails containing the following personal information: 60 containing credit card numbers, 572 containing thousands of social security numbers, 292 containing birth dates, 532 containing information of a highly personal nature, such as medical or other legal matters, not encrypted. It's still very common for this to happen, even though there are laws preventing it, but we're also then assuming that people are following the laws, and that may or may not be the case. And sadly, more often than not, it's people not following the law. So applying the digital forensics tools to social media, this really needs to be a section all by itself, because social media does contain more evidence than we realize. They actually had a 60 Minutes did a huge special on social media tracking of a surface-to-air missile from Russia to the Ukraine, where it fired from a field and took down a Malaysian Air 777 jet. And just through social media, 60 Minutes was able to actually source the surface-to-air missile coming from Russia, getting to the border, and it was actually able to track its entire pathway just by bystanders and their social media posts. So social media forensics is on the rise. You'll be surprised how many people are posting things that they shouldn't be posting, like evidence of cyberbullying and witness tampering and other intellectual property issues. Social media can often sustain a party's claim uh, or actually get them fired, depending. This kind of depends on the organization you're working for. For software for social media forensics is being developed. There aren't a lot of tools out there right now for it. And that's actually the end of this chapter. We talked about uh, emails, types of scams, phishing, farming, spoofing. We talked about email investigation. We talked about access to victims' computers for recovery of evidence files. We talked about email programs and email servers, and we finished it off with a little bit on social media forensics. If you have any questions, please let me know. This is one of those chapters that seems pretty straightforward, but it's deeper than a lot of people think. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.